Creepy dating stories are a dime a dozen, since the dating scene is an intrepid one at the best of times. But far from the average bad date night, some dating horror stories venture into the bizarre, when what is meant to be an experience filled with surprise and wonderment turns into a scary experience that, in many cases, has left people feeling lucky to be alive. Number 5. We've all heard the dating horror stories where someone meets a potential partner online, arranges to meet them in person, but ends up being robbed by either their date or someone who is accompanying them. But one man, only known as Mr. Hu from China, took this one step further when he started dating a woman known only as Mrs. Juan. Hu and Yuan had been dating for a few months, but Mr. Hu started to feel that Miss Yuan might leave him since he was unable to find work at the time, and hence couldn't buy her any presents. This bothered him to the point where he decided that the only way for him to make some money was to turn to crime. And his plan seemed to work, since within a few days he was able to shower Mrs. Yuan with expensive items, such as a brand new computer and clothing. Everything seemed to be on the way up until Miss Yuan checked her bank account a few days later. She noticed that a total of 5,300 yuan was missing, and she filed a complaint with the police, who checked the bank's CCTV security footage. To their surprise, the culprit was none other than Mr. Hu. It would later come to light that he'd stolen her bank card out of her purse and withdrew 42,000 yuan at an ATM. He then returned the card and used the cash to pay for gifts that he then gave to Mrs. Yuan. But he didn't stop there. He stole the card a second time, withdrew a further 1,100 yuan, and repeated the process. He was tracked down and arrested on the 9th of February 2012, and received a fine of 2,000 yuan as well as 11 months behind bars, leaving Miss Yuan to look for a more suitable partner. Number 4. The strange but true dating story of a 54-year-old Australian woman named Deborah Marie Taylor occurred in June of 2017. At the time, Deborah was chatting with a German man who has not been named via WhatsApp. As the two got to know each other over the messaging app, she shared details of her life, such as the fact that she was a US Army sergeant, and that she would be able to take her forever leave if she was able to pay a total of $12,000. Believing that he could help her out, the man made an initial payment of $6,500 towards her leave after Deborah pretended to be a processing officer working for the Army. She contacted him again, asking for a further $6,300 in order to speed up the process of having her leave finalized, and the man obliged once again. She then used the money to pay her bills and on gambling. Knowing that she couldn't pay the man back, she told him that she had lost all the money after she was scammed by 2 Nigerian men, and even went as far as to provide him with their phone numbers and photos of the scammers. But her own scam didn't last very long, and she was arrested. But the story didn't end there. Police would later learn that Deborah had in fact been talking to a Nigerian man online, but she soon figured out that she was being scammed. When she confronted the man about it, he confessed not only to the crime, but to the fact that he was in the process of scamming a German man by pretending to be a woman. He convinced Deborah to join him in his deceptive act. This is when Deborah made contact with the German man and led him to believe that she was romantically interested in him. After receiving the money, she was supposed to transfer it to her Nigerian accomplice but decided to spend it instead. At her trial, the judge deemed her offense serious enough to warrant jail time, and she was sentenced to 12 months behind bars. She was also ordered to repay $12,700 in restitution. She was ultimately released on a $5,000 good behavior bond after spending 6 months in prison. Number 3. What was supposed to be a fun night out turned into a truly scary dating story for one man who has remained anonymous after he matched with Stephen Lonesborough on the popular dating app Grindr. On the 11th of October 2019, Lonesborough drove to the man's house in Wollongong in New South Wales in Australia, where he picked him up and the two men headed out on their date. They'd been out together a few times before, and so the man knew what to expect. At first, everything seemed to be going swimmingly, until the early hours of the following morning, when Lonesborough started acting strangely and erratically and expressing paranoid thoughts. The man started to feel uncomfortable and asked Lonesborough to give him a ride home. But as they started the hour-long drive, Lonesborough's behavior became ever more alarming, and he told the man that he was convinced his GPS was actually a listening device. As he became more erratic, he threatened to end the man's life and said that he was going to crash the car. This led the man to ask him to stop the car on several occasions, but his plea fell on deaf ears as Lonesborough drove on, and he ended up being locked in the car for several hours, with Lonesborough holding the passenger seatbelt so tightly that it left red marks on his neck. The man also told police that at one point, Lonesborough had punched him in the lip and also bit him. But luckily, the man was able to keep his wits about him, and as Lonesborough slowed the car down to navigate around a roundabout, he opened the passenger door and jumped out. He then ran to a nearby house where he was able to ask for help and contact the police. When Lonesborough's car was eventually found, it had been abandoned, but the man's phone and backpack were still inside. He was ultimately tracked down by police, who say that when he was arrested, he was heavily intoxicated and started yelling, "The Lord will provide the truth." He then appeared in the Wollongong local court on charges of detaining a person with intent to gain advantage or cause bodily harm. His lawyer argued that he suffers from mental issues and that he couldn't receive treatment while in custody, but despite this, he was denied bail. He was eventually sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison, and will only be eligible for parole after serving a year and 8 months. Number 2. Dating can be an expensive experience, but one dating horror story cost one man a lot more money than your average night out. On the 23rd of December 2017, Anthony Busby, a prominent attorney from Houston, Texas, went on a first date with Lindy Lou Lehman, a court reporter from Dallas. During the date, the couple had a few drinks, but Lindy had a few too many and she became heavily intoxicated. Upon arrival at Anthony's house, a $14 million mansion, he decided that it would be better if she returned home, and he asked her to leave, calling for an Uber in the process. But Lindy wasn't ready to go home yet. She became angry and refused to leave, running back into the house and hiding. Anthony searched the house, eventually found her, and told her again that it was time to leave. But this caused her to fly into a fit of rage as he was calling for a second Uber, and she started yelling that she wasn't leaving. She became so angry that she tore 2 paintings off the wall and threw red wine over them. She also threw 2 sculptures across the room, smashing them to pieces. But it would turn out that the paintings were original Andy Warhol creations, each valued at around $500,000, and the sculptures were each worth around $20,000. Anthony added that she also ripped an original Monet painting off the wall and one other, but luckily those didn't sustain any damage. Lindy was arrested on the 23rd of December and charged with felony criminal mischief, with her bail set at $30,000. Her defense lawyer, Justin Kiter, stated that they're not in agreement with the facts that Anthony gave to the media. But when he asked what the real story was, he stated that he would save it for the courtroom. Thanks to her fit of anger, Lindy faces up to 99 years behind bars due to the high value of the property that she destroyed. Her attorney later stated that she was being negatively affected by the resulting media scrutiny, but that she was weathering the storm. Number 1. When a marriage is in trouble, most people decide to end it and go their separate ways, or seek out intensive counseling. But in the scary dating story involving Emile Cilliers, events took a very different course. In April of 2015, Emile Cilliers, a 38-year-old Army sergeant, had been married to Victoria Cilliers for 4 years, and she'd just given birth to their new son 5 weeks before. They lived in Amesbury in Wiltshire, England. Victoria, known as Vicky, was a veteran accelerated freefall skydiver with more than 2,600 jumps to her name. And on that weekend, Emile arranged for her to go on another jump as a treat after having the baby. Upon arrival at the airfield, he offered to get a parachute from the kit store, but immediately after doing so, he disappeared into the bathroom, claiming that their daughter needed to use the facilities. Vicky was unable to jump that day as the weather was unfavorable, but rather than leave her parachute in the hangar as is normal practice, he left it in her locker. The following day, the weather wasn't improving, and Vicky, along with 11 other jumpers, decided to do a low-altitude jump from 4,000 feet called a hop and pop. She was the last to jump, and when one of the other skydivers reached the ground, he immediately knew something was wrong with Vicky's rig. The lines on the chute were knotted up, and she spun to the ground, landing heavily in a newly plowed field, but miraculously she survived. It would later come to light that Emil was heavily in debt, and he was set to receive a $158,000 payout in the case of Vicky's death. As further details emerged in the case, it was discovered that Emil had been involved with a woman who he met on Tinder, and he told her he was in the process of leaving his wife as she was having an affair and one of their children wasn't his. He was also having an affair with his ex-wife. Later, it was discovered that it wasn't the first attempt that Emil had made on Vicky's life. On the 29th of March, just days before the jump, he had intentionally caused a gas leak in their home while he was away. He was ultimately found guilty of attempted murder and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Despite this, Vicky continued to visit him for up to 8 weeks while he was in prison. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.